There's a team and a city that ignites passion and creativity on and off the pitch. With its cultural diversity and openness, we are creating the world's leading sports center for innovation, the Barça Innovation Hub. More than 2,000 athletes, male and female teams, 5 professional sports, and the largest stadium in Europe. Promoting knowledge in the sports world and establishing an ecosystem to collaborate on a global scale with universities, research centers, hospitals, leading brands, startups, and other sport entities. At Barça Innovation Hub, we've already proven the future can be addressed in any shape or form. A new tracking system that redefines the word accuracy. A smart cap with personalized pods for rehydration. Envisioning the future of Espai Barça with mixed reality. Together, we can lead a revolution which contributes to society through sports. Wanna join us? Barça Innovation Hub, reinventing sport.
Hello, bienvenidos and bon dia. My name is Steve Gera. I am the U.S. Ambassador for the Barça Innovation Hub and the CEO of Gaines Group, an innovation firm that works out of Los Angeles, California. And today we're going to be jumping in and talking about the U.S. sports and entertainment landscape, and talking about a little bit about how companies in and around sports, and then companies that are actually producing sports and entertainment for fans, how they think about building, investing in, or partnering to create new products, solutions, services, really new value inside of the for both fans and then also for athletes. I'm joined today by three good friends of mine and collaborators. First, Kim Frisch from World Wrestling Entertainment. She's a VP of Corporate Development. We also have Brian Kopp, CEO and partner of Phoenix Sports Partners. And then we have Kyle Bunch, the managing director and a VP for the Global Sports Ventures Studio. So first and foremost, what I want to do is I want to kind of just get into and explain a little bit more about what our current panelists do at their organizations. So Kim, let's start with you. What's your role at WWE, and what do you focus most of your time on right now?
Sure. So, hi, Kim Frisch, VP of Corporate Development at WWE. In this role, I manage all of our corporate venture investments and any of the acquisitions that we look at across sports and entertainment. And this role within WWE is part of the global strategy organization. So it's really tied into helping to support our strategic pillars as a company, and also to bringing in innovation across our lines of businesses across the company. So as you can imagine, when we're sourcing and screening early stage companies, that allows us to bring in a lot of those companies, and whether or not we invest in them, we seek to do commercial partnerships or learn from them at the same time.
Awesome. One of the things I'm really excited about with this panel is kind of the diversity, but also the similarities that all of you have. All of you have built companies, have built products for your respective current organizations, and then all of you have done a little bit of investing in new value creation as well. Brian Kopp, you've worked across the industry in a number of different ways, from Stats LLC to SportsView to Catapult as the president here in North America. Can you tell us a little bit about your role at Phoenix and what you're working on these days?
Sure. Thanks for having me on. Pleasure to be with all of you. I've been with Phoenix Sports Partners really the last year and a half, and the idea behind it was an investment vehicle working with early stage and really all kind of different sports technology companies. And what we saw was in our opinion, there's elements of the typical venture model that wasn't quite working. We wanted to be a bit more operational. We wanted to help our companies really transition from, there's a lot of products out there that are trying to become companies. So really what we're doing is setting up an operational vehicle to invest, but also more importantly, help these companies grow. And, it kind of builds off, as you said, Steve, I was at Stats, I was at Catapult, I've been in the sports technology space for more than the last decade and seen how far it's come and all the interesting innovation that's come along really in the last 4 or 5 years. And what we're trying to do is position ourselves to work with companies at really all stages, but inherently there's a lot of early stage companies and a lot of innovative companies coming into the market. So we're trying to build a platform to help those companies come from an idea and from an initial startup and turn it into a real growing business. So that's really our focus at Phoenix. We're investors, but inherently we're also operators.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And Kyle, over to you. You've worked in advertising, you've worked in sports previous to that. Now you're back in sports with the Global Sports Venture Studio. Tell us a little bit more about the Global Sports Venture Studio and what you do there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Steve. So the Global Sports Venture Studio is part of a growing evolution of a relationship between the LA Dodgers and my company RGA. So for those not familiar, RGA is a global marketing and innovation company. So that sometimes looks a little bit like, more traditional or digital advertising agency, sometimes is a bit more in the sort of consulting world, helping to solve kind of bigger business problems. And then also kind of extending into the venture world. We've been around for 40 some odd years and done everything from commercial production to building apps and digital experiences. And obviously over the last, 5 to 10 years, that world has changed a lot with the startup kind of energy and the things that were happening from the bottom up becoming so much more a part of what our clients need. And so a lot of our role as RGA Ventures within the larger RGA company and as GSVS is how do we engage with all those things that are happening out in the startup ecosystem and bring them into the work. And for us, we work across clients that are sort of old school or, old economy leaders who are doing a good job of evolving to the new world, your Nikes, your Disneys, your PepsiCos, as well as your sort of new economy, leaders like a Google, a Verizon, a Samsung, a Slack, or a Reddit. So regardless of kind of where you sit in terms of how long you've been around, where where innovation plays within your company, everybody has this growing need to do a better job of engaging, partnering with startup technology, enterprise technology. And so with the Global Sports Venture Studio, we apply that approach specifically to sport, work with Major League Baseball, Major League Soccer, UEFA, Fox Sports, Adidas, and a host of others, and really help them find what's going on out there, what's coming next, who are the innovators that are leading the charge, and what are the best ways for them to partner, to invest, to bring all of those learnings and new technologies into their core experiences in business.
That's great. And so I think what we're able to establish in a very short period of time is you guys cover a lot of the kind of the value creation gamut. And Brian, you just said it, last 4 or 5 years is when a lot of these new companies that have been coming into the sports ecosystem have kind of driven down there. So let's talk a little bit about the mentality around value creation in the United States today. So Brian, I want to come back to you. You ran businesses at Stats LLC. And Catapult in the U.S. for a number of years. Catapult was one of the very first sports tech companies you can honestly say that really had true market penetration here in the United States. About 10 years ago, people started I was working in NFL, and we started talking about how there's this new company called Catapult. We're supposed to put devices in all of our players and let them run around the field, and then we're going to create this tracking data. And no one had any idea what tracking data was, right? And now you have a proliferation of companies that are trying to create new fan content with tracking data. So when you think about the way Catapult and even Stats too, going back to your time there, how it kind of penetrated the market, you had to evolve over time. So how did your offering and how did you get into that market penetration kind of share point, and how did that evolve over time? And when did you notice that organizations began to start thinking about, hey, we should invest in companies as well as just use them as a supplier relationship?
Yeah, I think where I really started seeing that was at Stats, even before Catapult. I joined Stats in 2008, and my first assignment, we acquired SportView out of Israel, and it was a technology being used sparingly in soccer, and we needed to bring it to U.S. sport. And when I approached all of the leagues and the sports teams, they were all interested, mainly because they wanted differentiated information. They wanted to be able to track things they'd never tracked before. And so in those early days, it was about getting access to new information. And so there was a lot of interest. Now, it's funny when I look back at those days, not only was the technology fairly rudimentary versus where we are today, I kind of jokingly refer to it as the Pong of video games. Like back then it seemed very revolutionary. Now there's a lot of things you could do much more easily than we were doing back in the day. But when people wanted that information, they didn't know what to do with it. They just knew that they wanted something different and unique and be able to track things they'd never tracked before. When we were doing it in the NBA, I used to describe it as a play-by-play was like reading a book, and our player tracking data was filling in the gaps of that book and filling in information that didn't exist before. So in those early days, it was very exciting just because people wanted access to it, and we were very much partnering with teams. I didn't feel like I was selling them anything. I was partnering on bringing new products to market. Really, the pivoting point for me at Stats was when I realized that the smart teams were investing in ways to leverage that information better. And I knew that they were going to start bringing things in-house. Again, in those early days, I used to call them spreadsheet analysts that were doing data in Excel. We came along and you could no longer handle this data in Excel. You had to invest in programmers and software, and you need to start to do your own databasing. And that had never really existed at those teams. So over time, those teams started investing in those internal organizations and internal resources to make better use of that data. And the same thing when I was at Catapult, there was a need for tracking how hard players were working in practice other than with your eyes. And so bringing technology to bear was a key part of that. And it was I don't want to say it was easy, but it was certainly made it easier to get people to adopt certain technologies when we were solving a problem that they already had. Now the challenge became, what do you do with that information? And that's a ongoing battle you even see today. And it depends on the organization, depends on how well they embrace information, how they use technology. But in those early days, it was about what was possible. I think to the second part of your question about how do I saw the shift in teams and how they looked at things, they started to realize that the true power of that information is how you use it and how you make it customized to your organization. And in order to do that, you need to hire the right people. You need to be able to ingrain into what you do. It's not this thing that sits over to the side, but it's information that you really put into your organization in the right way. So I started to see that shift just a few years ago. And that's really where I saw an explosion in different ways to leverage the technology. Whereas in the early days, there wasn't many options. And now there's a lot more options. But the teams that are really smart about it are the ones that are starting to bring things in-house, being more creative, really leverage that data in more actionable things to that organization than just trusting whatever that vendor has to bring to the table. So it was an evolution over 4 or 5 years, but you're really starting to see innovative companies embrace that today.
I love it. So when you talk about innovative companies, I got to come back over to you, Kim Frisch, because WWE has been innovative for a long time. From pay-per-view, which seems like people when Vince and WWE really leaned into pay-per-view, and then really leaned into OTT. WWE has been kind of leading the charge in a lot of different ways for a number of years. And when you think about interesting companies, it's publicly traded as well. So does WWE have a preferred pathway for new products and new business development?
I would say I would agree with you and Vince's vision for many years. I think we're open to partnering and building internally. And I think the way we think about partnering versus building is really sort of looking back at our core competencies, for example. So at our core, we're content creators, storytellers. We produce live events at scale globally, and we distribute that content all over every platform available. And we have a massive social digital following, and as you mentioned, the WWE network. So with that, and I guess I would also highlight our mobile gaming portfolio. But when you look at those opportunities and our vision around those opportunities, and delivering that content to fans in ways that they want to engage with us, we really partner with people for that kind of that distribution. So whether that's Endeavor on the streaming side, Endeavor is also a partner for our podcast business. On the mobile gaming side, we have a number of partners. We don't, obviously we're not a game publisher, we're an IP holder. So we're very open to kind of partnering across the ecosystem. And I guess with that, I would also say, as part of the venture investing process, and as I mentioned, the screening and sourcing earlier, we definitely are always looking to partner or learn from startup technology companies, because in many cases, we understand that that's the way to innovate, is to really kind of partner with that world and bring that innovation in-house.
And Kim, I want to come back to you real quick, because when you think about like the number of startups that you're currently looking at, where's the most growth? Is it on the content, delivery, distribution, content creation side? Like, where are you seeing, or is it more on, another part of the WWE business? But where are you seeing like the most deal flow for companies that you're actually taking a look at and seriously either thinking about investing in or partnering with?
I think it's hard to talk about venture investing and looking at opportunities right now, just given what we're experiencing with COVID-19. So I think what we're spending a lot of time on is how fans are changing the way they engage with sports and entertainment. Obviously, it's hard to hold live events with fans right now, pretty much. So how does our broadcast change? How can we make that more engaging with fans? How can our fans virtually interact with our athletes and with our superstars? So I think, this is a fundamental shift that I think had already kind of started before these times, but now it's kind of, there's a lot of exciting opportunities out there, less on the content creation side, but more how do we take our content and make it truly special for fans in a time right now.
And Kyle, so the Global Sports Venture Studio is a really interesting entity, because it has a number of consortium partners who work together alongside your team to basically surface startups that you could potentially partner with, you could potentially invest in. But it also has like this creative capital aspect of it that where you can actually like build things with your partners. So how did GSVS partners really look at value creation? Would they rather build it themselves? Would they rather just buy and invest in things, or are they looking to partner with the Apples and Googles of the world in order to build brand new platforms? How do you kind of like herd all the cats and direct traffic, and how do your partners think about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a full spectrum, right? And this is true inside and outside of sports. I think, once upon a time that spectrum probably had very stark poles. One side being, completely own the digital future and go try to carve out entire parts of the future ecosystem that you were going to own, that we realize now that, a handful of people like Bezos and Zuckerberg can do, but most others aren't going to just flat out own entire parts of this new digital landscape. The other was the sort of like run and hide, let's just weather this storm and everything will go back to normal. Obviously, where we are now is everybody's kind of somewhere in the middle. Some are still in those sort of, we know we need to tick some boxes when it comes to innovation and, explore a bit of where the future's going, but we have a core business to focus on and protect. And then there are others that get into, hey, we really need to push aggressively, all the way up to, I would hold up somebody over the years like Major League Baseball as a kind of gold standard example that said we need to go out and build things from the ground up and build out an entirely new entity on the back of Major League Baseball that became Advanced Media, that became BAMTech, and eventually a multi-billion-dollar sale to Disney. I think everybody right now is mostly settled in somewhere between not all the way to the next BAMTech and go build it all themselves, with a few exceptions, and not completely, let's just go rent from someone else. Let's go, let's not learn from the mistakes of others in the past and hand over a lot of our data and a lot of our consumer relationships to third-party middlemen. How do we form new types of partnerships that are going to ensure that we're still part of that overall direct relationship, building that direct relationship with our audience? And so I think all of that is basically a way to say, I think everybody's got a couple areas that they're pushing on that they feel like they need to own more. And then areas, I think Kim did a good job of calling out, and WWE is a great example where there are certain things I think they push very hard on owning and building themselves, and then making sure that you're really thoughtful about how you leverage partnerships to round the rest of that out to ultimately deliver on, like, the consumer wants all of this. What are the parts that we really feel are a differentiator to us to go build and look at or incubate or do from the ground up, and which are the parts that, let's lean on best in class players, be they the Apples and Googles, be they a well-backed startup who's doing something really interesting, or maybe an earlier stage company that we could get in, try some things, and hey, maybe we do acquire them and make them part of that core differentiated stack down the road. But I think it's, trying to figure out where to place those bets, knowing you can't go build it all yourself from the ground up.
Yeah, got it. So let's talk about venture. So you've all kind of like, we've talked about it a little bit, but I want to put y'all relatively on the spot around venture investing, because there are a lot of people who just don't believe that like sports is ever going to have large returns. Like BAMTech was an anomaly, and that probably won't happen again. Or if it does, it'll happen from that league perspective again. So is venture, investing in sports, is it ever going to really return? Brian, I want to come back to you, because you said it earlier. You said really within the last 4 to 5 years is when this proliferation of technology companies have really started to penetrate sports. And Phoenix also takes a pretty unique approach to early stage companies as far as like trying to basically, just help them grow. So why are you taking this approach? All right, at Phoenix, and then also, do you think that sports is a good venture, is going to actually be good venture returns eventually?
Yeah, so the easy answer to question 2 is yes. I mean, I think that's why we're focused on it. But I think the more detailed and nuanced answer is that the explosion of technology in the sports space over the last couple of years has been very positive and has led to a lot of opportunities. But as we all know, sports is a very unique and interesting industry that in some ways is hard to crack into, and in other ways it's a very relationship-driven, network-driven industry where you can't just show up with the best product and idea and think it's going to win the day. So being able to bring more to the table than just an idea or a product, and I kind of said that earlier, I think that what we see is a lot of early stage companies that are products. They are pretending to be a company, but they're really a product, and they struggle with the elements around it of building the business. And so really what we're trying to do at Phoenix is enable them to focus on the product they have and help them to grow around it. So we're taking really the business practices of more mature private equity type businesses to early stage companies and allowing them to focus on what they do best, which is the innovation of the product side, and let's grow the rest of it. And I think as a result, we'll end up having the opportunity for really good returns, just doing it in the right way. It's not just going to be a passive, here's an investment, we'll show up on the occasional board meeting and let you go. That's not our approach. It's not what we think will win the day eventually. It's being a bit more hands-on, operational, helping them weather the storm. And I'll tell you, that strategy has played off really well for us just in the last couple of months, because we're spending a lot more time helping our companies weather through these uncertain times. And we think we'll end up on the backside of it pretty well positioned, because we're able to help them go through it in ways that maybe passive investors may not. So it's not a model that works for everyone, but I think it's something that from us feels like in this industry, there's going to be a lot of opportunity. And that was even pre-COVID-19 and pandemic. Coming out of this, there'll be different and unique opportunities. And we want to make sure that our companies and any companies we work with are well positioned to weather through that. So it's venture, but it's slightly different. It's more operational venture type of investing, but we still think the returns are there because of the interest and the explosion of the impact that technology can make in the sports world around in all sports and around the world. We see a lot of different disruption, and I think those returns will be there if you structure it the right way.
So Kim, coming over to you, when you look at WWE and you're looking at startups, have you seen any 5X, 10X companies that you guys have put money into? And what's your realistic view on sports? Do you agree with Brian? Do you think that it is going to return over time?
I do agree with Brian, and I echo his sentiment and appreciate what he's doing in the space to really, I think, transform some of these companies from really great products into companies. So, I mean, for that, we are grateful. I do think that there's a lot of opportunity in return for sports. So when I think of sports, I actually think of it as more of a broader concept, as it's entertainment for a large portion of the world, frankly. And so I think if you broaden that perspective on sports, it makes the market opportunity a lot bigger. Obviously, we're coming at it a little bit differently because we're sport entertainment. So that I think that definition really resonates with us. And I would say I think the definition of sports is expanding over time. I mean, to Brian's point about things growing over the last 4 to 5 years, we now have esports as a legitimate category in sports, and I think you are starting to see some of the upstart leagues starting to take mind share. When I think of that as a broader category, I do think that there's a bigger market opportunity than sort of more of a niche view of just sports. And again, that could be just, where we sit within that ecosystem. So, I guess I would echo what Brian said for sure.
Terrific. And then Kyle, so GSVS works across, from performance to fan experience to searching for robotics for levies to you name it. And you've been around venture, your whole career. What conversations are you guys having with both startups and venture capitalists in sports? And then where do you think the long-term returns are going to come from? Are there specific segments that you think are going to end up returning better than others?
Yeah, I mean, so I'd say, looking at it broadly and echoing things from both Brian and Kim, and even, I'd say even more optimistically, I mean, you look at so much of what powers sport or, and at the core of it, so media and entertainment, totally prime example. Like you've got the best IP you could possibly ask for. And as you think about major media startups and the importance that sports plays, and, if you're trying to get something off the ground that's trying to reach a big consumer audience, sports is going to continue to be essential. And, we're seeing the areas where biggest companies in the world from an enterprise tech standpoint are bringing a lot of capital and a lot of innovation in, as well as the startup space, where there's certainly no shortage of big money flooding into media investments, health and wellness. And I look at, a category that's going to only get more and more important coming out of this. Sports has a significant play in that. And that gets from everything to, and Steve, you and I have talked about this and hosted events around this before, things that LeBron is using today to stay the peak athlete will eventually reach a scale. I mean, not every one of them, but it will reach a scale that reaches everybody. As we think changing face of how we educate kids and keep kids in shape, like that will have impact. Sports can help provide tools and help reach scale that may become the new standard for how we educate our kids. So future of cities. And whereas we think about redesigning cities, stadiums are at the heart of every good Sim City model has got a big, thriving, bustling stadium somewhere in there. So I think all of these areas that are only going to pick up, sports can have a big play and can make these strategic investments in companies that have very clear paths, the 10X and beyond. And I think it's, a lot of what we're experiencing in sports, the floodgates we've kind of talked about opening. And I certainly, as you've said, sitting on the startup side for years, looking at everything, working at RGA, where seeing all these things happening in other industries and going, why is it not coming to sport? And realizing it didn't come to sport for so long because this is largely legalized monopolies that we play in, guys. Like the owners of sports own everything, and they were happy to be some of the last, guardians trying to keep everybody out. They didn't pay attention to things like, always take note of things like the music industry and the futility of trying to fight Napster, and eventually realizing, hey, maybe we should give consumers what they want instead of suing them. Sports has finally woken up, I think had to wake up in a lot of categories or a lot of industries, a lot of audiences that you're going after that you're losing to things like gaming. And so what we've seen over the last few years is that sort of not unlike a Google disrupting Microsoft, where it was just, forget the Department of Justice. Consumers just decided there's a better way to go get their information, and that just blew open the category. I think that's where we were at before this, and now it just gets that much more interesting, where you go, if consumers want the on-demand world of Netflix, they want different ways to experience the same story, whether they're casual or avid, they want more ways to be interactive. Like, we have to answer for all those things. And there's fringe or emerging sports that will do a better job of that, will capture audiences that they might not have otherwise had. And there are all of these different categories that the people who take a leadership position to solve these will accrete benefits that go way beyond just the sports implication and sports returns into much bigger societal returns. So long answer, but thank you for bearing with me.
It's a great answer, because I think this actually sets us up really well for like the next question I have for Kim. Because I think like WWE has always really kind of taken a leadership position. And back when, WWE Network was launching, a lot of people in sports thought that the McMahon family and that, WWE as a corporation were insane. They were like, no, just get rid of that and let somebody else do it. Right. But now that's actually become like a pretty significant pillar of the business. And it's also driven other, revenue streams off the back of it. So what are the segments of the broader venture ecosystem that you're looking at right now and that WWE is looking at right now as being very interesting and things to look at? Is it education tech? Is it life sciences? Like what are the types of broader kind of segments that you guys are looking at right now?
Yeah, so I think for us, and just to take a step back, because for us, we view the corporate venture really as a driver of strategic learning and innovation for the company. So, and of course, always looking to bring as much value as we can for our portfolio companies. But when we look at venture opportunities, we tend to stay more in our lane as a result of the fact that we do want to innovate. So we will step out of the lanes to learn, and we would potentially invest in that. But it's really got to be tangential to our core. As I kind of mentioned before, I do think though there are new ways for if you have a world where there's a lot of obviously stay-at-home families and fans, if there's different ways for us to reach those fans, I think you hit on wellness. I think that's a huge category and only growing. Education is another big one. How can we is there a way that we can participate in that space that makes sense and sort of stays true to the business that we are, but enabling our fans to get touch points with our talent in ways outside of the ring, I think is important. So when I look across the space that we look at for venture opportunities, it really does stay sort of core to that sports entertainment, but we could expand outside to look at things like fitness, wellness, education and those types of things. Sports science, obviously, but we're still staying in sports and entertainment in that regard.
And Brian, how about you? I mean, we've talked about computer vision before, and you've come from Catapult, a company that is evolving. And I don't want to, so you've seen kind of the writing on the wall, right? And so I've always considered you to be a really good kind of futurist in the sense that you can really kind of see around corners. So I don't want to put you on too much of a spot, but like, what are some of the segments of technology right now that you are most excited about and that you think are going to grow over the course of the next 10 to 15 years?
Yeah, no pressure on that intro, but I think also the caveat meaning, I think no one really knows what's around the next corner right now. But I think, what's exciting to me, and it somewhat what Kim just touched on, I think that there's still a long ways to go with overall athletic performance and wellness. And that could mean anywhere from tracking an elite athlete and making sure that they can get to their peak performance at the right times, all the way to keeping young kids active in the right way. So I think there's a whole spectrum there, and technology, not just in tracking what happens, but making it engaging. I think there's some great companies that are doing very engaging activities to keep, especially young athletes or just young people in general active and connected, and using technology to do that, I think is a very positive thing, but also creates a huge opportunity. And when Kim was talking earlier about how sports is also entertainment, what I was thinking, and then Kyle, you kind of touched on it, sports also then blends over into just overall athlete performance. So I think it kind of sits in between those two things, which is pretty interesting. And then two other areas in general are esports. I mean, that's an evolving market. It's one that I think I'll be one of those that a couple years ago, aside from my kids playing, I was just like, whatever, this is a bit of a fad. It's going to go away. It's not going anywhere. It's a new dynamic that is continuing to grow. I think as the industry matures, there's going to be a lot of interesting opportunities that come along. It'll be interesting to see whether it matures more like a traditional sports business or an entertainment business, or somewhere in between, and what that looks like, and the different, as the ecosystem evolves, there's going to be interesting opportunities that come out along from that. And the last one is the overall fan experience. I think that even before the pandemic, there was a lot of interesting areas of how do we make that experience of going to a sporting event different and better and enhanced, because for the longest time it was what it always was, and there's a little bit of nostalgia in that, but the younger generation needs more than that. They're not just going to sit quietly and watch a 3-hour event without some sort of engagement or interaction with their device or some other way to have a good experience, and they want that because there's nothing like going to a live event, and I think we're all missing that right now. We can't wait for it to come back, but it's going to come back in different ways, and it's going to be led by technology, whether that's be the safety aspect or the engagement aspect or connecting to people that aren't at that event. There's a lot of different ways to do that, and I think technology is going to lead the way.
So Kyle, I want to bring this back to you because you kind of touch on everything because you're seeing the entire field. So when you think about bringing this back to sport and entertainment, because you did a pretty good job of answering the broader markets that you're potentially in, broader segments that you're looking at. So what are the things that you're hunting for GSVS partners right now, and what areas do you think are overdeveloped or underdeveloped? Like, have we, so Brian just mentioned esports. Esports is going to need a lot more development over the course of the next couple of years. And I think that's one that's, maturing, but still probably relatively underdeveloped, right? Whereas player tracking companies, there are a lot of player tracking companies, and there may be some sort of consolidation on that in the future. So that one might be slightly overdeveloped and a little bit more mature. So what are you searching for GSVS partners right now, and what do you think is overdeveloped and underdeveloped?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll start with the sort of simplest part of the sort of overdeveloped, underdeveloped, and maybe then take a step back. I mean, I think you hit on, certainly, you've got spaces like player tracking, wearable categories that have just existed for a while. It doesn't necessarily mean that there aren't new things happening. It's just there's a lot of legacy players there's a lot of newer players that are doing something compelling, but maybe haven't built the full stack or the client base and kind of proof points that some of the more legacy players have. And that full spectrum sports betting, we've talked a lot about a number of different companies in that space that each have something interesting, compelling going on. Each have something missing, like a key league partnership or something to make you feel like, oh yeah, these guys are definitely around for a while. So a lot of noise, hard to kind of sometimes separate the signal. Esports is another category. I think the general sort of big picture view of how I look at a lot of these things and just the technology adoption or evolution arcs would be, I think so much of what we've experienced over the last 2 decades is like first wave has been largely about just getting every person connected. Second wave was really about like multiple devices. We went from we were connected in front of a laptop with email and a couple different touch points to phones and all of the different sensors in our houses and Alexas and all these different form factors. And what we're really, even for all of the big advances, if you look at, sports and beyond, we're really just now into the third wave where, okay, all the people are connected, all their various devices are allowing them to stay connected and gather more data. What do I actually do with all of this data? I think we're still at a point where most your wearable and technology companies develop, bringing more and more data to the table. Are we really getting actionable insights on the back of it? Sure, starting to, but not nearly at the power of, as we've got, so much data being logged on human performance. We should be unlocking real evolutionary leaps. And we're just starting to get there with that. When we talk about fan experience and that next generation stadium, like we've been putting a lot of different pieces of technology in there. Have they come together in a way that unlocks something next generation, transformative? In most cases, not necessarily. Not you'd point to something like a Disney Magic Band and be like, that's more of a, wow, that feels transformative. So I think in general, it's looking at where are the areas where people are, building that next layer on top of what we've been seeing for a while. Where with sports betting, like it shouldn't just be, ooh, there's a different data point, different stat I can bet on. It should be something that really has a magic factor and really allows me to go like, wow, how'd they do that? Or like, this is something I can't possibly give up. And so, trying to find those things, and that's, needle in a haystack kind of searches. And sometimes, to your earlier point, requires some creativity. And that's where I think we try to come in, working with, helping to unlock those business opportunities at the league or sports entity side, a technology platform that may be raw material. It may be moldable clay more than it is like, here's a thing that you plug right in. It's like, a lot of those technology, we aren't there yet. We aren't to the like plug and play transformative solution phase. We're to the like, this is an amazing building block if you layered in this IP, or if you applied this fun computer vision game to a human performance scenario. Now, all of a sudden we start to get to something that we'll look back on 5 years from now and go, wow, we could never live without that now. But it's that synthesizing of these multiple technologies. We now that we have some clear front runners, some clear systems of record, whether it's, big established Instagrams of the world or emerging, catapults and other kind of wearable players in the team enterprise level. So building on top of all of this technology is the next wave for me.
Steve, I could just jump in and add on that. I mean, it's something, Steve, you and I have talked about, and Kyle kind of touched on it. I think it's interesting when I think about the evolution of technology in sport, just in the last decade, 15 years or so, there was that focus, as Kyle just said, on just collecting stuff that we've never collected before. People thought that was interesting, but didn't know what to do with it. And then there was this phase around, okay, we can make sense of this one thing. I think you said it very well, Kyle. The next part is going to be, okay, we've got each of these individual buckets or these individual products. How do they all work together? Yeah. And part of the challenge has been, maybe they're different companies and each of them have their own commercial focuses. And so it's not as simple as just plugging them all together. Maybe they're different technologies, but that's going to be the next wave of how do we make all of this work together? And you probably couldn't have predicted how it all evolved. Like other industries, you all build on what happened before. So you couldn't have predicted that we got to this point. And again, this was all pre-COVID-19 and pandemic. I get coming out of this, that's really going to be a big focus. How do we take each of these individual pieces, whether you're talking about a fan experience or the entertainment piece or the athletic performance? We've got all these different things you can do. The question is, how do you pull it all together and do something about it, make decisions, make a better experience, make a better product for the fan at home or in the stadium? And I think we have a lot of the building blocks. So it's not like we need some revolutionary technology to come along. It's how do we now do the blocking and tackling of putting it all together, which is,
and I would point to, like, we talked about, like, what's that, potential big 5X, 10X. And, we say, okay, BAM Tech certainly was an outlier, or at least at this point looks like the big, huge gold standard outlier. But what if some of these various technologies that teams, let's just use our host here at Barça, if they've been investing in a lot of technology around human performance, to reach a scale that now isn't just looking at their sample set of their athletes, but all these other athletes. Someone could theoretically build the AWS or BAM Tech for human performance. Like, it's not even conceivable that you leverage a lot of that, you partner with some tech players, and now all of a sudden you've got a multi-billion. And if we thought, AWS was big, the only thing bigger than the software market would be the healthcare market. So if you build the AWS, that's $1 trillion company. I'm not necessarily saying anybody in the sports realm is going to get there all by themselves at the same extent that maybe BAM did, but that to me is the, like, aspirational potential that's on the table.
Absolutely.
I think I would echo what's been said, and I do think that now is a time where people, all of us, all organizations will be forced to make changes because we're in this for a while, and I don't think anybody on the call knows what it's going to look like at the end, if there is an end in sight. Hopefully there is, but I think it just forces us all to be innovative and bring things together to, I looked specifically at the fan experience, whether that's in venue. Certainly that's going to be different for the foreseeable future, but even the at-home viewing experience has to be different. If you have events going on where there's not fans in stands, I mean, there's, that's a really big component of live sports is fan reactions and the fan participation in the sport. So I do think there's a lot of opportunity, and I do think now is a time where everyone is forced to kind of think differently.
And Kim, staying on you for a second, you did a really good job at WWE as far as, like, giving your fans exactly what they want. I think, like, the podcast is a good example, right? Launching a new podcast business. I mean, WWE is renowned at creating, large scale content and micro content, here on YouTube and then throughout the entire universe. So talk a little bit about the podcast business and how that kind of came about. And was that at all built off of any of the kind of adventure exploration you had been doing? Was there any kind of interplay there?
Actually, that is a business that grew from a lot of internal work through our strategy team and our advanced media group, and of course the technology team, and really a collaborative effort across the company to bring forth that business, less so from the venture side. But it's been really exciting to watch. I think we're very excited about the prospects for the podcast business going forward. And like you said, we're always trying to find new ways to reach our fans, whether that's on the social platforms or the podcast business, or we're always exploring, new ways to engage with fans. I think you're seeing a lot of interesting opportunities now, because if you can't have fans interacting with our talent, in person, I think you're starting to see a lot of interesting companies kind of pop up and enable that interaction that feels one-on-one, even though it's virtual. So, I think we're always kind of trying to find, the next way to, engage with our fans.
So that's something that you guys were able to build internally, right? And so then coming back to Kyle and the conversation we just had around, the AWS for human performance, right? So like realistically, because I agree with you guys. I agree with the sentiment there with everybody. But like getting that off the ground requires you to get all the stakeholders and then also enough money to actually get it off the ground. But from athletes, being okay with their data now being used even anonymously in order to create new value off it and be mined for insights, all the way to, getting enough leagues and teams and or, entities who are involved in sports and entertainment involved in that. And then also now you need a big player, or you need a lot of dry powder probably to go tie all of that together. So like realistically, does that mean that like one league has to do it, akin to Major League Baseball saying, hey, we're going to build BAM tech, and part of that, ostensibly is probably accidental, because that really just started off as websites and then just matriculated and grew as they solved a lot of different problems over time. Or do we need some sort of like moonshot moment inside of sports? And if we do have that moonshot moment in sports, who should lead that? Should that be the teams and leagues leading that? Or should that be some company like Google and Amazon coming? Because everyone wants Amazon money, right? So should that be Amazon coming out and saying, listen, we're going to give 2 leagues $1 billion to do X, Y, and Z, and actually, really improve health sciences through this AWS of human performance. Kyle, I want to start with you on that one. Like, what's the best way to actually start kind of solving this? And how do you even
I'll go the cop out and say it's a little bit of all of it mixed together. But I'd say specifically within there, I would say, I think you're spot on in terms of it's really Herculean effort if you try to kind of look at it as one standalone versus a multi-year, decade-long sort of commitment to get to these things. Like, Rome and AWS both weren't built in a day, and you start with like, here's one core offering around one thing that we can do, and then we start moving more in a direction. I think in this case, you probably could look at a lot of organizations like Barça that have laid out some tangible steps and laid a lot of groundwork by each step of the way, providing themselves with a clear KPI and a gate to get to say, like, here's what we're trying to accomplish in year one. Here's what success is going to look like. Okay, now as we get that, we're building our own ecosystem of other partners who are aligned. We're getting more, proving the ROI internally to get more investment around it. And I think, that's ultimately you're going to need a few organizations that do a really good job of that say like 10 years from now, here's where things are going, have that vision. Here's the work back to get there on our side, and making our own investments, building internally, getting the right stakeholders on board, while also looking at like, hey, we're not gonna be able to get there alone. So who are some of those tech partners? And it gets even down to the way you're structuring some of your big deals now, right? And that, the value of it, we used to focus so much on sponsor value in terms of a check that got written for logo placements and different brand integrations. And now it's, who's the right partner for us from a cloud infrastructure standpoint. And they're, Google or Amazon, they'll bring a lot of resources and big check to the table to be your official cloud partner, but they're also bringing their own set of expertise and infrastructure. The Microsoft NBA deal would be another really good example of this. So, as you look at that, some of your next sponsor deals, those are going to shape that roadmap and that innovation landscape. And so I think you need to be able to kind of bring that village of like-minded innovators together. You need to potentially have multiple initiatives that, you're not necessarily, one may prove to be the right path, and one may end up kind of something from Gera as you go. I think it starts with a vision of, North Star to buy into on the long term and some tangible near term 6 to 18 month steps you can take to start building in that direction.
And how do you think, so Brian, coming over to you, so let's ground this back, and we're really in a little bit of a transition right now, big transition forced upon us, but that may end up actually, helping create some new opportunities on the back end, right? Yep. So maybe we're able to do this. So coming back to like COVID-19, right? How has that shifted your work and focus? And do you mentioned earlier that I feel like you were basically saying that the companies that are working underneath the Phoenix umbrella are probably better positioned because of the model that you guys are using, because you're able to help them with their PPP loans, help set an operational agenda in tempo for the next year. Are your companies going to be stronger coming out of COVID-19? And then also, like, what are the new opportunities outside of COVID-19 that you're kind of looking at, and how has it shaped and refocused you?
Yeah, it's hard to say anybody's going to come out stronger. I think it's a matter of, how many hits is everybody going to take during this whole experience. But I think that the focus for us in really most of 2020 over the last couple of months has been on really mission critical things. It seems like an obvious statement, but I think that what you find when you really have to take a very hard look at all the different things you're doing is, do we need to be doing that? Is it really mission critical? Is it something that is helping us achieve our goals in the short term, position as well for the long term? And when you're forced to go through that process, you realize that there's some things you probably are wasting time on or money on or focus on. And so we've been spending a lot of time with our companies on mission critical activities, that whether that be how you're spending your money, how you're spending your time, how you're allocating your resources, really making it mission critical. And I think it's going to be that way probably for the most of 2020 until we really know what the rest of this year looks like. And then when you think about next year and beyond, I know it's hard for anybody to think about 2021. We're all looking forward to a different time, but I think that when you think about coming out of this whole experience, it is going to be about the new world order. In some ways, we'll go back to somewhat normal. In other ways, I don't think we will come back to anywhere near normal. And what does that mean for how you're going to position your company, how you're going to, focus your time and energy and efforts? And we certainly have some companies that have done a little bit of pivoting and they've kept busy and their business has somewhat improved, but there's other areas that the business will continue to be a question until we know what the world looks like. So it's all a matter of perspective, but I think for us, 2020 is about mission critical activities. 2021 beyond is going to be, once we know what this new world order is, as we've been talking about in this conversation, how do we go about that? And I'll tell you, I was all in on Kyle's $1 trillion idea, and then you guys made it sound all hard and complicated. So I was ready to go do that. And now you're talking about data and all this, let's just go back to, 5 minutes ago, $1 trillion. Let's do it. I like it.
Moonshot. We all just want to do moonshot.
Moonshot sounds good until you realize that, it takes.
How many of them don't quite make it?
Well, I mean, if we could ever get WWE, Major League Baseball, La Liga, and all these leagues to join some sort of, but you got to get the athletes. That's the tricky part. And
I get it complicated again. Just stick with what Kyle said.
It's the good thing is, though, right? Is that in COVID-19 is obviously, it's devastating for the planet. It's devastating for the sports industry. It's just, but the most important thing is it's devastating just for people in general. But it is going to ultimately basically speed up macro trends, right? And I think for a long time, people have been talking about, how healthcare is significantly impacted by sports, right? And how if you were to start actually reverse engineering what healthy really looks like from supremely healthy people, i.e. athletes, and reverse that back to issues over time, that there's certainly some good that can be done for the world in that regard. So a lot of these macro trends are probably going to speed up. So Brian, I think maybe we'll be able to get there faster, because maybe someone from Amazon's listening and they'll call us all up and they'll be like, hey, if you guys can make that happen, we'll give you $1 billion. And what what league or organization wouldn't want a little bit of slice of $1 billion right now?
But you touched on it earlier of the challenges with getting athletes on board, with sharing of athlete data, but you introduced the disruption that is a lot of revenue that's been impacted or gone away, a lot of games that were supposed to be played that aren't, and dollars that have to be handed back. Like, we're at a moment where if there was ever a time to go in with a pitch that said, hey, you guys want to make up some of the revenue we're going to lose on gates in 2020 and 2021, there's a lot of that. There's people willing to pay a lot of money for that data now as part of a research initiative, or as part of this next thing that Amazon or Google or whoever's pushing on. So that's part of my hope in this, is that the status quo was really lucrative until it wasn't tenable, and now how does that force us to look at some things we've talked about but maybe not been able to make the economics work previously?
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And I think that, like, when you think about like some of the organizations that could end up like really, kind of leading the charge on attaching themselves to some of those macro trends. I come back to WWE because you guys, kind of been at the forefront of this for, a number of decades, Kim. What are some of the macro trends that you're looking at right now that are going to accelerate? And as they accelerate, they're going to affect the strategic roadmap for WWE.
I think right now what we're, spending a lot of time on, which I'm sure everybody is on this call, doing the same, which is kind of monitoring and trying to understand sort of the curve of the recovery in the United States, and really trying to understand how that impacts live events and the return of fans to venues. And again, I could not echo more what Brian said. I don't think any of us know what that new world order looks like, but trying to kind of plan for a couple of different scenarios and what it looks like. And again, I guess I kind of look to the macro trends that I see are, sort of that in-venue experience, as was discussed earlier. That's definitely going to change. How that changes, we'll have to see, but certainly safety and security of the fans will be first and foremost. And I think secondly, that engagement piece is critical for the younger generation who's just doesn't want to sit there for 3 hours. They have their device out while they're sitting there anyway. So I think the in-venue experience changes, and I'm thinking more specifically of things that are impacting us at WWE. And then I do think that the viewing experience changes. It just becomes more interactive. And there's a lot of technologies out there that, I think, Brian, you mentioned, that kind of either gamify the experience of viewing or make it more engaging, whether that's through immersive technologies, or sort of more social media curation, so that if you're home viewing, you feel like you're in the venue viewing. I think there's a lot of interesting technologies that are coming and popping up, and really interesting to see. But again, from a macro perspective, we are, I'm sure, like everyone else, kind of monitoring the trends, monitoring the health patterns, and of course, watching what all the other leagues are doing and saying about their return, whether that's NHL, MLB, NFL, all of them. So.
And I think like one of the segments of overall technology that people have been talking about for 10 plus years now, and it's really penetrated the consciousness over the last 5 years for the broader population, is artificial intelligence, right? We do have one question from we have a couple of questions. I'm only going to take one from our viewers out there. But it was around artificial intelligence and how it's going to be integrated in fan engagement and training and matches. And this seems like a moment that's kind of like ripe for more integration of using AI on some of the large data sets that Brian, you alluded to, Kyle, you alluded to, Kim, you alluded to them as well. We have a lot of messy data out there, whether it's on how fans move around stadiums or how athletes move on fields. So is AI going to become a little bit more, proliferated in the post-COVID era? Do you guys think? Brian, let's start with you. How are you looking at the AI space, and are any of your companies working in that space right now?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is yes, and the reason is because it wasn't there before because we didn't have the right data. You couldn't really do a lot with the type of data that we had available from sports, again, even a decade ago, versus where we are today, and about data around fans, around what goes on in the actual sporting event itself. Just the data was missing. And then you got to make sure the data has the right quality, and then they could be used in the right way. So I know in the live event, there's this push to want to use intelligence to predict what happens next, whether that's for the gambling, the betting area. So that's all dependent upon not the models you can build, but the data you're putting into that models and making sure that it's accurate and that it's actionable and that you can do something about it. So that has been missing. I think that problem is closer to being solved. And I think from going on forward, it's going to be, when people say AI, they don't always know exactly what that means or how it's being utilized, but really it's just a way of taking a bunch of messy data and making it actionable. And so the first part of that is making sure you have enough messy data and it's not too messy and that you can organize it. And the second piece is knowing, what are you trying to solve? There's a lot of people that chase sports and say, I can do cool stuff. And for me, working with teams and coaches, you can come up with the coolest stuff in the world. If you don't know what your coach is looking to do, it doesn't matter. Like you could say, hey, I can do, like I remember clearly a team telling me, I can tell you in basketball, based on what had happened throughout the game, who should take the last shot. And I said, don't ever say that to a team or a coach. Don't come up to them and say, I'm going to use data to tell you who should take the last shot. Even if that's true, the fact is LeBron's taking the last shot. Michael Jordan's taking the last shot. It doesn't matter if you say, hey, based on the analysis of this game, this person over here should take it. Who cares? But, I think that over time you start to see that information used, and it started for a lot of sports at the general manager, and then it's kind of being pushed down. And as you see a new generation of coach, they're more adaptive of that data and that technology versus maybe some of the older coaches that grew up using more intuition. So I think AI will help in that, but you're always going to have to put it in the context of how it's being used. And that's where, if you don't come from the sports area, you come in thinking, I'm going to completely revolutionize what happens, when really it's going to be small changes to get there. You're not going to suddenly wake up and have a coach of 30 years say, you're right, I've been doing it wrong all along. Let me do it your way, Mr. AI person. Like, that's just not how this stuff works. It's a gradual process.
So that's great advice for especially for someone who's who's starting a company, who's in startup land, or a really smart, hopefully there's some really smart mathematicians or some really smart kids out there working at a university watching this right now, thinking about, if I build this widget and I present it to Kim, or if I build this product and I present it to Kyle, I'll be able to do X, Y, and Z with it. So let's end with a little bit of advice to those people. Kyle, what would you tell a startup? Like, what's the best approach for building a product and then trying to get it into the Global Sports Venture Studio, or try and get it into a team?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and let me just tie in a little bit of the last question, because I think it's actually, relates a lot here as we talk about, that role of AI, how it's going to change a lot of the sports experience. And I think a lot about the actual viewing experience, and where, I think Microsoft and NBA, when they announced their partnership, sort of nodded at areas of, is the future broadcast media experience going to be highly personalized, where I tune in for a Thursday night worth of NBA games and maybe I'm seeing a decidedly different mix, or use the easiest example of, like, what if my red zone channel looked different than yours, and I'm seeing things that are more tailored based off of, my fantasy team, my preferences, the things that that matter to me. So I think those kind of areas where AI and the fan experience and viewing can get really interesting. Now, the other part of it, where I would tie it into kind of, my advice, the big challenge there, and a lot of the sports betting things that Brian was alluding to, is latency. They're big, huge enterprise, like, problems at the fundamental pipes of the internet level. And I know, as I stepped into this role, even I was talking to Major League Baseball about the future of betting and all these in-play moments. And you ultimately got to these issues that are like at the Apple, Amazon, if not like the guys who own the pipes levels of kind of challenges. So there's a lot of what could be done, but that just you alone are not going to solve for it. And so my advice to the startup world is look at the ecosystems and the big tech partners you need to plug in to, and look at, like, on the one hand, make sure that you're not so completely tied to a single platform that if they go, we're just going to make that feature ourselves, you're out of business. But at the same time, make sure that you whether it's about being AWS or Azure compliant, whether it's about building something on top of the Shopify ecosystem because it's massive and growing incredibly fast as the go-to retail platform. And so build something that works in the Shopify app store, or look at ways to build digital media solutions that tie directly into platforms like Spotify that are becoming more and more important for distribution of sports content. So look at the established players who have a lot of that big billion-dollar infrastructure and figure out how you can build things that unlock the potential of that, because those big investments, when Salesforce signs massive deals with the leagues, if you've built a solution for fan data that taps into Salesforce instead of something that's going to try to compete with that 9-figure Salesforce deal that a league just signed, you're considerably more likely to succeed. And when we go do a lot of our evaluation, that's some of the first things we're going to ask is one, is this, could we pilot this at game speed in a live environment and not have it, melt down? And some of that might be, hey, you guys have a way to test with 1,000 people instead of us having to turn it on for 50,000 people in the stadium or nothing. But also the proof point of like, well, will you work with Salesforce or Oracle or my point of sale solutions, or, so that compatibility is everything, and making sure you understand for the consumers or the B2B, the clients you're going after, what is the ecosystem for them, and how are you going to make sure that you add value to it instead of competing with it?
Oh, I love it. And so, Kim, how about for you? You have fan experience companies. You have a lot of companies who come to WWE and are trying to get in front of you on a daily basis. If you could give those companies advice to prep them for having a conversation with you before they actually get in front of you, what would you tell them?
I think it's a couple of things that I think are kind of obvious, but it's really understanding, where we might have pain points that they could help. And of course, not just us, but across the broader ecosystem, but really trying to, because I think when I'm looking at things, I'm looking at it both from a venture perspective, but also the opportunity for us to partner with startup companies throughout different parts of our organization. So, I'm looking at, from a venture perspective, does it make sense for investment? But on the other hand, hey, is this a company that we could be a client for and really help them grow their business? And then maybe sometimes the venture piece becomes a part of that. But it's really, I think, especially in this environment, understanding new pain points that companies like us are having and across other leagues and sports teams. The other piece is really, again, it feels kind of obvious, but really carefully selecting your investor group. Obviously, we come in as a strategic minority. That's the role we play. We don't tend to lead transactions, but when you are seeking your lead, we always really feel more, just more comfortable if we know that you have a lead that is someone who understands your business and who understands kind of how to help you grow. That's our main objective, is to help companies grow and do that. But if you have a strong lead, for example, I think what Brian was talking about earlier was where they really take more of an operational role and turn a product into a business. Really being careful with who you select with your as your investor group. And then when you're approaching strategic minorities like ourselves, it just makes it an easier conversation.
That's great. And Brian, last word with you, as we're coming up on, we're well past the hour at this point. And so last word with you. You have companies, you've worked with a myriad of startups over your time. What's the best advice you can give them as far as working with sports teams, or as far as approaching Phoenix and trying to partner with you guys?
Yeah, I typically say two things that sound counterintuitive to each other, but I'll explain why. And Kim just touched on one, which is focus. Have a mission. Know that what you're doing is solving an actual problem. Sounds very obvious, but I can't tell you how many companies that come up with a cool product and now they're looking for a problem to solve. And that's really not the way to go about it. It's really finding a problem that you think can be solved through technology or some data analysis or however you're approaching it, and being focused around what that is. And then the second piece, which sounds counter to the first one, is flexibility. And I'd say this even pre our current situation in COVID and pandemic. I see a lot of companies that say, this is what I'm doing, and they're so stubbornly focused on that, they don't know how to, I don't even say pivot, because pivot makes it sound like you're doing a 180, but just like work your way through and adapt to what the market needs and opportunities are. And I see a lot of companies that aren't able to do that well. So that flexibility is also very important. Flexibility in how you adapt your overall message, how you go to market, how you're working with your clients or your partners, whatever that may be. So it's a combination of focus on what is the mission of what you're doing and trying to accomplish, but also being flexible and adapting to what the market needs or what your partners need, or what the opportunity is in front of you. And I think a lot of companies get hung up in one of those two buckets, and the ones that I think are best positions are the ones that are able to balance those two things.
I love it. The two F's from Phoenix Sports. I love it. All right. So thank you all very much. I think we're going to end it there. Hopefully our listeners and watchers have gotten some great tidbits out of here. I know there's some great points. I'm looking forward to starting a human performance AWS business with each and every one of you. Kim Frisch from World Wrestling Entertainment, Brian Kopp from Phoenix Sports Partners, and Kyle Bunch from the Global Sports Venture Studio. Thank each and every single one of you for joining us today. Best to you and your families, and thank you to the Barça Innovation Hub. We'll look forward to seeing you guys next time.
Thank you, Steve.